What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Adventure Outpost, your hub for all things movie related. Another weekend has come and gone. It is once again time to talk those juicy box office numbers. All eyes were on this weekend. Everyone was talking about how this was going to be the peak of the summer. This was going to be one of the biggest weekends we had. We had two huge movies coming out. As you can see, one of those movies right up there, The Flash, as well as Pixar's Elemental, and then so many holdover titles that everyone was expecting this to be one of the absolute zeniths of the summer, and that was absolutely not the case. This was one of the most tepid weekends here at the box office for what you were expecting to happen. It is crazy just what we ended up with this past weekend. I was watching as the day went by how it was going to go. Working Friday night was still pretty busy, but The Flash and Elemental were not nearly as busy as a lot of the holdover titles. Granted, the two new movies were in the bigger theaters, so they had more seats to fill, as opposed to more of these other movies that were in medium-sized theaters that could fill up pretty quickly. But still, the fact that these movies were not hitting up to par in these big theaters shows a lot about the fucking reaction to these movies. Shows a lot about how the marketing and what's going on behind the scenes in a lot of these companies is messing with these movies. And we're gonna dive into all that. We're gonna talk about all that as we go along, and then we get into a bunch of these things. Quickly, as always, before we begin, if you enjoy any of this content, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, drop some comments down below. Is how we help this channel grow. And as always, we start with our 2023 box office chart, where we follow along to see just how many $100 million weekends we're gonna get here at the box office. We still were able to get a $100 million box office here at the box office weekend, so it wasn't a total loss. However, people were expecting this to be the biggest weekend of the summer, not only of the summer but possibly of the year. They were expecting a big 200 plus opening weekend here with everything, and that was not the case whatsoever. We'll go now to the chart and take a look. As you can see here, in the 24th week of the year, we couldn't even beat last week, which was just the opening of Transformers against the second week of Spider-Man. As you see in week 24 here, we opened with $161 million for the weekend, down 1.2%. We couldn't even get over 200 million like we did week 22 with the release of Spider-Man. It is insane that two of the biggest movies coming out of the summer were not able to put us over that hump. They were expecting huge things from here, and we did not even get close to those huge things. We couldn't even beat last weekend. That just goes to show how awful, not technically awful, but just how mediocre and disappointing the results were from this past weekend. We were expecting big things, and we did not get big things. So right now, Warner Brothers and Disney especially really need to be sitting back and just going down and figuring out what the fuck we're doing wrong. How do we course correct? How do we get asses back in the seats for these movies? Because they really need to start doing that, because especially Warner Brothers has always been pretty hit or miss, and they've always been pretty hit or miss with their DC, so they really need to be working on DC anyway. But Disney especially, if you look back from like 2015 to 2019, Pixar was untouchable. They could put out literally anything and it would make close to $1 billion. And now since the pandemic, it has not been the case. Not been the case whatsoever, and they really need to sit back and figure out what's going on. What are we doing that's not working? How do we course correct? How do we get these asses back in the seats, especially for Pixar movies, because Pixar movies are their bread and butter. So if they can't even get people in the seats for the bread and butter, that is a cause for concern. I think it's a multitude of things, but I think the biggest thing that is hurting these Pixar movies is the fact that Disney, since the release of Disney Plus, has trained people to expect these movies out on Disney Plus very quickly. They expect these movies, like I think it was during the pandemic, Soul and Luca, straight to Disney Plus. So right there, that's already ingrained in people's heads that like, oh, the Pixar movies are just supposed to go to Disney Plus now. And then not only that, but so quickly after their release in theaters, do they get dropped on Disney Plus. So you've trained a whole group of families who it's already expensive enough to go to the theater. You've trained all of them now to sit and wait for this movie to just come out on Disney Plus so they can watch it at home for free, and they just don't have to worry about spending egregious amounts of money to go to the theater. I think that is absolutely the biggest factor that they need to get. They need to train people back into the theater for these movies. I think another thing that hurt it is there has just been too many animated movies coming out too quickly. You had Super Mario Brothers back in April, absolutely gangbusters. Everybody went to that. You had time to recover and everything, but what didn't help is that about 3 weeks ago, before Elemental, you dropped one of the biggest movies of the summer, which was Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and everybody went to that. Families came in droves to go see that. and now you expect them 3 weeks later to bring the whole family out and spend another $100 plus experience for another animated movie. It's not. It's too soon. It's way too quick. The same thing's going to happen in 2 weeks with that movie, My Life as a Teenage Kraken. That one's going to suffer too because you just have too many animated movies coming out too quickly. This stuff needed to be spaced out. So I think that's another factor that went into it. And it doesn't help that Elemental was an original IP. It wasn't based on any property from Pixar or anything. That's another thing that's going to hurt it because original IP is already a tough thing to get people into theaters for, especially in animation. And it's not like it was in 2015, 2019 when they can just throw anything that they wanted in there and people were going to go see that shit. That's just not happening right now. So I think Pixar needs to sit back. I think Pixar needs a certifiable win. That means they got to go to an established IP, something that people have been waiting for, and just shove that shit out right now and get people back in theaters. That means making like another Incredibles. They already announced a Toy Story, so you know that's going to happen. Really, they should do a Ratatouille 2. You want to get people back in the theaters right now? You want to drum up a lot of stuff? Ratatouille 2, baby. Bring it out. Everybody wants it. You'll get people back in theaters. Train people to get back into theaters and to expect this theatrical experience for at least 2 to 3 months before it's going to come out on Disney+. Get people back into the theater. Obviously, these are not surefire wins to fix the problem, but I think these are things that need to be addressed. But with all that out of the way, we're not going to talk too much about it. We'll talk about the Flash's issues as we get to the Flash. But let's dive into the top 10 and see just where everything fell in this week's box office charts. So we take a look here for the weekend of June 16th to the 18th, and the Flash manages to secure the number one spot with a $55 million opening off of a $200 million budget. That is just awful, especially when people were assuming they were calling a $70 million opening this weekend. So right there off the bat, that's not great. But I remember as we were going along with the forecasts that were coming in Thursday night and then Friday, as we were getting into Friday, they were saying maybe 82. And it was like, oh, it's going up. Okay. And then come Saturday after those Friday night totals, they were like, no. It's going to be closer to Black Adam. It's going to be somewhere in the 65 range. And you're just like, okay, that's a big drop. But all right, whatever, 60 something. Like, okay, DC's got its problems. And then this drops Sunday night and it's a $55 million opening. And you're like, oh my God, that's not great. That's not great at all. I mean, for any other movie, $55 million opening, pretty huge, but not for the way blockbuster movies are made today. Every blockbuster seems to have a $200 million budget, for fuck's sake, these days. So just a $55 million opening ain't gonna cut the mustard. And it's just absolutely insane that we're getting these returns with these huge types of investments. Something's got to be done. I really thought after with the post-pandemic that they were going to shift in the way that they're making movies, and it's not. Every movie is a $200 million movie. It blows my fucking mind. 55, not great though, especially for the Flash. DC running on fumes. We talked about issues here at Disney. Warner Brothers issues are just the same. Not that they have to train people to go back to the theaters and everything. I think the biggest thing with DC right now is that they've given no reason to care about these movies. You already announced before the year started, before any of these DC movies were coming out, that you were starting over. Everything was going to be from scratch. You hired James Gunn. We're starting over. Everything that's coming out is relatively meaningless. You rendered everything that comes out this year inert. So why should anybody care? Why should anyone want to go see these movies? Especially when everyone talks about today, these big giant, franchise universes, multiverses and everything, that the way you're building, you've basically told people that this stuff doesn't matter. We're starting over. We're going to create a new universe. So why should anyone go see these movies? And it's showing. Nobody showed up to Shazam 2. Your bread and butter, which was the Flash that you were expecting for this year, just heavily comes in under forecast. Blue Beetle doesn't stand a fucking chance at this point. That thing is dead in the water. And Aquaman 2 it's going to be insane how hard the drop is from that movie. You have $1 billion in that first movie, and I have no idea what's going to happen to it with this year. It's going to be crazy ridiculous how much that movie probably bombs. Especially you got an already problematic Amber Heard in there. You got the fact that nobody gives a fuck right now about DC. You've told everyone not to give a fuck about these movies. So it's just a recipe for disaster. None of these movies are going to come up to par this year, and it's all their own fault. They should have waited until after these movies come out and then announced that they are doing all this shit. Because you've just effectively shot yourself in the foot here with these box office totals, because this is, for the Flash, not a good sign for anything going forward. This movie really needs to have some legs going forward if it wants to make any type of money back. In second place, we have Elemental opening to $29.5 million off of a $200 million budget. We talked ad nauseum already about Disney's problems in getting people back into the theater, and it shows right now that people are aren't showing up. This is the worst opening for a Pixar movie since their first movie, Toy Story, and that was all the way back in 1995. And that wasn't even a bad opening. That was your first movie ever. Like it's crazy how Disney has shot itself in the foot in just keeping people out of the theaters for their movies, because this is an adorable movie. I didn't really talk about The Flash. I saw The Flash as well. The Flash is fine. It's not great. It's not awful. It's right there in the middle. Like there's stuff I liked about it. There's a lot of stuff I didn't like about it, but I didn't hate the movie. It was enjoyable. It didn't make me feel like I wasted my time at the theater. And Elemental is same along the boat. There's nothing overtly that I hate in the movie. And Elemental is just enjoyable. It's just an enjoyable, fun, like their first shot at a romantic comedy almost. It's just an enjoyable movie. Pixar doesn't make bad movies, which is why an opening like this is so sad to see, because this movie deserves to have an audience. It deserves to find its spot here in the box office. Pixar deserves to have their movies in theaters. They're just fantastic animators. Everything about their movies. This movie looks fucking beautiful. And I mean, you'd hope for $200 million that it would look fantastic. And it does. It looks absolutely fantastic. And the movie, it's just enjoyable. It's not the greatest thing you're ever going to see. It's not the worst thing. It's just right there in the middle of the pack. And that's okay sometimes. The reviews for this movie piss me off so much, because it only seems to happen with Pixar, where the movies are never allowed to stand on their own. They always have to be put up in the totem pole against the all-time greats. And I get it. Like, Pixar has made so many fantastic movies and so many movies that have stood the test of time that you want to hold them to a different standard. But they've made close to 30 movies at this point. Like, not every single one of them is going to be an Inside Out. Not every single one of them is going to be a Toy Story 3. Sometimes you're just going to get ones that are just middle of the road, enjoyable. And that's totally okay, because I would rather get just a nice, healthy average than them consistently put out movies that just don't come up to par and are dog shit. They've never done that. They've never made an absolute piece of trash. And the fact that people are calling Elemental a disservice to Pixar because it's not at the heights of their highs is absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's an enjoyable movie. It was actually a sold-out show that I went to, surprisingly, last night. And the audience was loving it. A lot of laughs. A lot of like heartwarming stuff in this movie. It's just an enjoyable, adorable movie. So I implore you, if you're on the fence about going to see this, you want to wait for Disney Plus, don't do yourself the disservice. Go see it. It looks beautiful on the big screen. It's definitely worth seeing over The Flash if you're only going to go see one of them for the weekend or upcoming or whatever. It's definitely worth finding that audience. It has an A cinema score. It's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, hopefully this movie will have some legs, so it'll be able to just like week over week, maybe slowly build up some acumen there. So for God's sakes, people, get out and go see it if you were on the fence about going seeing this movie. You will enjoy it. It will be worth it. In third place, the big talk over the weekend was, would Elemental be able to beat Spider-Man? They were expecting such a low total from Elemental that they didn't think. They thought it would settle for third, but it actually was able to make second. In third place is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in week 3. Drops only 49.9%. This movie is having fantastic legs. Takes in another $27.8 million. Brings its total domestic haul to $280 million off of a $100 million budget. This movie is just making money hand over fist. In fourth place, not doing as well as the other movies, Transformers Rise of the Beast has a pretty hefty drop in week 2, 67.2%. That is not great. Still manages to bring over $20 million, though, to bring its total domestic haul to $100 million off of a $200 million budget. And this is, even though we were not the greatest of what we were expecting this weekend to be, we still had a pretty big weekend here for every movie. You have 4 movies in the top 5 that grossed over $20 million. You don't get that too often in the post-pandemic era. So this is a huge win in and of itself, and a silver lining to look at for this weekend, that we had 4 movies that made over $20 million. We could also look at, we had 5 movies that made over $10 million. We had 5 movies into the double digits. That is good, because rounding out the top 5, we have The Little Mermaid in its 4th week, drops 49.9%. Also a solid little holdover for that. It just quietly continues to make money, at least here domestically. It takes in $11.6 million, brings total domestic haul to $253 million off of a $250 million budget. We take a look over on the back 5. Debuting in the 6th spot is the movie The Blackening. Opens to $6 million off of a $5 million budget, so that is a huge opening weekend for them. That is a hefty price right there. You're already in the green, making some bucks back, because I doubt this movie took a lot to market. So hopefully, if this movie can hang around for a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks here in the box office, it's going to make itself a nice little profit. In 7th place, we've got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in its 7th week, still hanging out in the top 10, drops only 30.8%. Absolutely fantastic holdover. It takes in $5 million, brings its total domestic hold to $344 million off of a $100 million budget. The Boogeyman in 8th place in its 3rd week drops 46.9%, takes in $3.8 million, brings its total domestic hold to $32 million off a $35 million budget. So this movie just inching close to making its budget back. Doesn't look like it's going to be able to turn a profit when all is said and done, however. In 9th spot, still hanging around, is Fast X in its 5th week, drops 61.7%, takes in $2 million to bring its total domestic haul to a paltry $142 million off of a $340 million budget. Oof, oof, oof. And debuting in the 10th spot, breaking records right now, is Asteroid City, a movie that was only released in a low release, very limited release. I believe it was like less than like 20 theaters. And it took in $790,000 of a $25 million budget. It releases wide next weekend, so I'm sure this movie is going to have an absolutely big, huge markup. Wes Anderson always seems to find his little crew there. There are the people that are just devout to Wes Anderson movies. I, however, am not one of them. Dude, it's just never been my style. I will go check it out because I do love Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is one of my favorite actors. So, of course, if he's got a movie coming out, I gotta go see it, but I'm not usually the biggest fan of Wes Anderson movies. Hopefully this one, though, will be able to buck that trend and I'll be able to find something that I enjoy in this bad boy. Before we move on, we'd like to take a look at our fallen heroes. These are our heroes that did their time in the top 10 but have bowed out for greener passages. We have 4 movies this week that have bowed out of the top 10. We take a look now here at the chart. Oh my God, we talked so much about it last weekend, about how close it was to taking the mantle. Would it be able to beat Puss in Boots and Avatar in the chart riders? And here we are, saying goodbye to Super Mario Brothers after 10 weeks on the chart. It bows out. What a shame. We got The Machine after 3 weeks bowing out. We've got About My Father also after 3 weeks bowing out. And after 1 weekend on the chart, Past Lives bows out. You guys did your time. You had your say. You had your fill. You made your money. But now it is time to say adieu to you. We will see you in the realm of physical media. And as always, we salute you. Now, with Super Mario Bros. Falling out of the top 10, with it being out on streaming, it is pretty much safe to say that we are going to say goodbye to it making any sort of huge changes in these top highest grossing movies of all time and domestic grossings of all time. So we're going to have our final tally right here. I'll keep chugging along with it as we go, but we're not going to show it week over week anymore. If anything happens as we go along, if some like crazy thing comes where it passes another one, I'll bring it back. But for now, I think it is safe to say that these are the spots where this movie is going to finish for now here in the highest grossing worldwide of all time and highest grossing domestic of all time. So we'll start with the highest grossing worldwide. It's going to settle for 18th place, which is huge to make it in the top 20 highest grossing movies of all time. Sitting in the 18th spot with $1.328 billion, right behind Star Wars The Last Jedi, and 17th with $1.332. Still, 18th place is absolutely phenomenal for this movie to do in the worldwide grosses. If we take a look over on the domestic front, no change over the past few weeks. We said that 14th spot was going to be where it rests, and that is absolutely going to be the case. It's going to sit in the 14th spot, $572 million, just ahead of The Lion King with $543, and just behind The Incredibles 2 with $608 million. Still, 14th spot for the highest grossing domestic movies of all time. Super Mario Brothers had an absolute stellar run at the box office, was one of the biggest earners of the year, much like we saw last year with Top Gun and Avatar, that if you put the right material out on the screen, if you put something out there that people want to see, that people are invested in, it's going to do gangbusters. Super Mario Brothers movie is the movie of 2023. Will anything else be able to top it? That is the question for the rest of the year. We turn our attention, as always, to the 2023 charts. We take a look first at the top 10 worldwide for the year. Let's take a look now at this chart. In first spot, to no surprise, and will probably remain this way until the end of the year, is the Super Mario Brothers movie with $1.328 billion. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in the second spot with $821 million. Looks like it's not going to have that last little bit in it to become $1 billion grosser, but still $800 million for the finale of the Guardians is nothing to sneeze at, especially with all the troubles that Marvel has been having lately at the box office. In the third spot, it might be doing terrible domestically, but worldwide it is still an absolute phenomenon. We got Fast X with $683 million. Full River Red in fourth spot with $673 million. The Wandering Earth 2 rounding out the top 5 with $604 million. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse manages to jump up into the sixth spot, absolutely ruining my top 10 bets for the year, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It sits at number 6 with $494 million. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania right behind that with $476 million. million. The Little Mermaid sitting in 8th place right now with $467 million. John Wick Chapter 4 in 9th with $432 million. And rounding out the top 10 is Creed 3 with $273 million. We turn now to the domestic front, where finally, for the first time in the top 10 domestically, we have all 10 movies at Blockbuster Status having grossed over $100 million here in the domestic market. In first place, we've got the Super Mario Brothers movie with $572 million. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in second place with $345 million. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in third place with $285 million. The Little Mermaid rounding us out in the fourth spot here with $255 million. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania with $214 million. John Wick Chapter 4 with $187 million. Creed 3 with $156 million. Fast X, just that absolute divide from worldwide to domestic, sits with $142 million. Scream 6 in the 9th spot with $108 million. And knocking itself into the 10th spot here is Transformers Rise of the Beasts with $103 million, knocking out the previous 10th spot, which was Megan at only $95 million. Now we take quickly over here to the 2023 Blockbuster Status chart. We won't go over all of them because it's basically just the top 10 that we just looked at. But obviously we have to throw in Transformers The Rise of the Beast, which is now joining the Blockbuster Status chart, leaving us with 10 movies now at Blockbuster Status. How many more are we going to see for the rest of the year? Transformers is the latest one to join. Will The Flash or Elemental have enough legs to be able to get itself into the $100 million club? I'm sure The Flash at least will. I don't know about Elemental. Hopefully Elemental has the legs to get up in there. I think the only other sure bet one to join the $100 million club here, Blockbuster Status domestically, for this month will be Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, but we'll see if the Flash and Elemental are able to jump into this by the end of the month. And now we turn our attention to one of my favorite charts week over week to look at, and that is our 2023 Chart Riders. It is our chart that lets us take a look at and see which movies have the best legs. We chart along seeing how long these movies stay in the top 10, so that at the end of the year we can take a look and see which movies for 2023 had the best legs. Now, obviously, we were talking about Super Mario Bros. Before. Such an absolute shame that this movie didn't have the 3 more weeks left in it to take the #1 seed. But we talked last week about how, with that movie being out on physical media, on streaming, on VOD that you could buy, was this movie going to absolutely just tank and disappear now that nobody had to go to the theater to see it anymore? And that absolutely was the case. Drops out of the top 10. It's now locked in, and it's just a shame that it was not able. Avatar and Puss in Boots still reign supreme. Let's take a look here at the chart now. As we can see, of course, Avatar The Way of Water still in the first spot at 12 weeks. It is going to be a mighty fucking task to pass that movie. If the Super Mario Brothers movie couldn't do it, I just don't see any other movie doing it for this fucking year. I think we're going to end 2023 with Avatar and Puss in Boots in that #1 and #2 spot. Absolutely amazing and hilarious. Avatar sitting in the first spot with 12 weeks. Puss in Boots in the second spot with 11 weeks. Super Mario Brothers movie now locked in the third spot at 10 weeks. John Wick Chapter 4 locked in at 9 weeks in the fourth spot. A Man Called Otto and Dungeons and Dragons locked in at 8 weeks apiece. Guardians of the Galaxy now has been in the box office top 10 for 7 weeks now. It is now tied with Ant-Man and the Wasp this year at 7 weeks. Will Guardians have another week in it to pass ahead and be the best legs right now at the box office for Marvel this year? Remains to be seen. I think it should do it. There is nothing big really coming out this weekend besides Asteroid City and the Jennifer Lawrence comedy No Hard Feelings. But with Asteroid City already in the top 10 and we only have to have one more movie join the top 10, I think it's safe to say that Guardians is going to hang around another week. We'll probably see Boogeyman drop out of the top 10, but you never know. With the way box office goes, you just never know these days. But that is the question in all of our minds. Does Guardians have another week in it to be the best Marvel movie with legs at the box office this year? Stick here next weekend to find out that answer. Right behind that, we got the absolute median average of movies hanging out in the top 10. You got Scream 6, Creed 3, Jesus Revolution, Megan, Missing, Air, and Evil Dead Rise, all locked in at 6 weeks apiece. And then we got Fast X joining us up here now in the 5-week spot right here. Does that have enough in it to pass over the median average hump of the 6 weeks? Can it get up into 7 and 8 and wherever? Or is it going to join the rest of those boys in the 6 weeks club and only hang around for another week in the top 10? Another question to be answered. And rounding out the top 5, we've got Cocaine Bear locked in at 5 weeks. Now we take a turn to look over at our top 10 bets chart. We take a look here at that. And if you look here on the left side, we've got my predicted. This is what I predicted would be the top 10 movies of 2023. Obviously at the top, we had The Little Mermaid, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, the Super Mario Brothers movie, Fast X, The Marvels, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Oppenheimer, and Aquaman. Now, so far on every movie that I predicted that would be in here as they've come out has been in here, but with Spider-Man joining up into the top 10 bets now, it is a short bet that my top 10 bets are just absolutely fucking pathetic and terrible and just not going. Spider-Man has effectively neutered mine because now no matter where Spider-Man ends, even if it gets knocked out of the top 10, it's already knocking out some of my movies that I have in here, so I've just all over the place. So far, I've got some movies in there. They are none of them in the right spot. I completely missed the mark on Super Mario Brothers, just completely missed how freaking epic this movie would be for so many people, that the Super Mario Brothers movie would be in the first spot. I completely overestimated on The Little Mermaid, thinking that it would follow along the lines with Aladdin, with The Lion King, with those top tier Disney live action remakes that quietly make $1 billion. Little Mermaid sitting in the 8th spot right now is just about to pass 500 million, but that is all thanks to the domestic box office. Internationally, this movie is not doing well, and the international market is where this movie needed to thrive to get this movie up to $1 billion, and that is just not the case. I think The Little Mermaid is going to end up being somewhere towards the middle to the bottom of the top 10 here, so I just effectively fucked myself with that one. So far, the only one that I am correct about is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Hopefully that one can manage to stay in that spot, and I can be right on about at least one of these. I think Ant-Man and the Wasp I might be correct on too. If Ant-Man drops one more spot, I'll be correct there, and if it can hang around right there in the 8th spot, it is another big win for me. Fast X right now is in the 3rd spot, but hopefully with some other movies coming out, maybe that can drop back down 2 more spots to get me in the right area. I think especially Mission Impossible will be able to do that. Question will be, how's Oppenheimer going to do? But I think I just don't feel confident about any of the rest of these movies. Aquaman, I completely missed the mark on. None of the DC movies are going to get anywhere close to being in the top 10. I really fucked myself on that one. Really just thinking that Aquaman would do all right thanks to how well the first one did, but I just did not take into account just the absolute turd that Warner Brothers did with DC and how these are all turning out this year. Indiana Jones, I feel confident will get into the top 10, so at least be right there. I think the Marvels will get into the top 10, as will Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer. The question is what are the other outliers? Are there any other ones that are going to come out that are going to completely throw my shit out of whack? Is Barbie going to be an absolute phenomenon and throw my shit out of whack? It remains to be seen. And then we take one last look at my predictions for the Blockbuster Status chart. As we see, everything on the left side, with the exception of Shazam, I was totally on the money for. And now we have another one joining the leagues in the second column. Transformers now making over $100 million domestically, so it's able to join this club. I had The Flash as a sure bet for making over $100 million just below that, so I really need that one to come up big. And then in my most likely to happen, I had Elemental there as well, so I also need that movie to just sniff over the $100 million mark for me. I think it will. I mean, if fucking Lightyear was able to do it, I think Elemental week over week will be able to get over $100 million. How much higher it'll have to go off of that remains to be seen, but I think it'll have enough at least in it to hit at least the $100 million mark. And that'll do it for all of us here at the charts this weekend. It was just an absolute wild weekend. The box office just going to show you that it doesn't give a fuck what you expect. You expect one of the biggest weekends of the summer, I ain't going to give you dick. That's just what the box office does. And when you don't expect something, like probably next weekend, something big happens. Obviously, that's not going to happen next weekend. It's going to be another light weekend next weekend, probably, with only No Hard Feelings coming out as the Jennifer Lawrence comedy. R-rated comedies have not really been doing good at the box office. You don't really even see them at the box office anymore. So the question really goes to see, is it going to be, it's been so long that people are desperate for one, that this one's going to come out and it's going to do gangbusters and it's going to restart them putting out R-rated comedies in theaters again? Or is it going to be one that just tells them we were right in not putting movies like this out and it's just going to have a nice tepid opening? The question is there. Is it going to be able to be a #1 movie? Like, we've had a new #1 movie every week since Guardians. The question now is No Hard Feelings, especially after the tepid releases of The Flash and Elemental, will No Hard Feelings be able to bust itself in there and get a #1? What's the second weekend of The Flash going to look like? What's the second weekend of Elemental going to look like? How's Spider-Man doing? How's Transformers holding on? What's Little Mermaid doing? No Hard Feelings now has 5 movies of competition, because that needs a big style. Like, I would say No Hard Feelings needs at least a $30 million opening weekend to come anywhere close to hoping for a #1 seat. And I just don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if it has it in it to do $30 million, because that'd be a huge opening weekend for an R-rated comedy. The R-rated comedies don't normally do gangbusters. You've got some outliers in there, you know, your Hangovers and stuff like that, but R-rated comedies aren't typically ones that are just absolutely huge money makers like that have these big gangbuster opening weekends. They usually just do all right, and then they make money with their legs over time. So will it be able to make enough, especially with how it's showing that these movies are just not coming up to par right now? Like, Spider-Man's been out for a long enough time that it's not going to make, like, if it made 20 something this weekend, next weekend it's probably going to make a little bit less. It'll probably be just under 20 million. Same thing with Little Mermaid is going down. Same thing with Transformers is going down. The question is what's the holdovers on Elemental and The Flash? Is The Flash's second weekend going to be enough to topple No Hard Feelings? That is the big question for this weekend. That is the question that I can't wait to see answered. I don't know if you're going to get one of these next weekend. It might be a weekend off. This weekend is my wedding on Saturday. Your boy's getting married. So I have a lot of shit to do this upcoming weekend. I am going to be fucking exhausted after this upcoming weekend. So obviously on Sunday, I'm going to be relaxing, but I'm going to be charting along with it. I don't know, though, if I'm going to be able to make a video that night and put one out for the next day on Monday. I'm going to try my best. But don't be surprised if one doesn't come out, because I got a big weekend ahead of me, all right? So give me a pass on this one. I'm going to try, but give me a pass if you don't see one. I will try and get one out, though, because that is a huge question that I do want answered, and I do want to chart along with and see is just what No Hard Feelings does this weekend. It's going to be a very interesting weekend to watch along with it. It's going to be fun. I'm going to be at my wedding, and my wife is going to be like, what are you doing? I'll be like, I'm just checking the box office numbers. It's real quick. Just give me a second. I'm just like watching the totals on Box Office Mojo or Variety. But that'll do it for all of us here this weekend at the charts. Until next weekend, and until the next video, you have been you. I have been me. These are the movies that we love so much. And as always, I'll see you at the movies.